Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're working on a Sthil mc251C. It's an easy pull start, and it started acting up on me a couple weeks ago. We need to dig into that a little bit more today. Anyway, if you get a chance, hit that like, hit that subscribe, heck, maybe even follow the bell for notifications. Maybe even follow the bell for notifications. Maybe even hit the bell for notifications. So our problem with this, about 2 weeks ago, it was running rough. I replaced the spark plug and the air filter was pretty gummed up. And this weekend, I tried to fire it up and it just kind of why don't I just show you instead of making weird noises? And that's about it. So I could do that till my arm's tired. So I'm thinking there's a carburetor problem. Let's dig into this. Well, step one here is to start digging into this. And I have never dug into this more so than taking this top cover off with just a regular flathead screwdriver. When I replaced the spark plug and air filter, boom, they're right there. The air filter just twists off. And here I am just kind of playing around. There's a couple rubber grommets there on the bottom of the, what I'm going to call the carburetor housing. I don't know the correct terminology. It's kind of rubber mounted. So I just use that same screwdriver to pop those off. And then here I am, I fast forward it because I'm taking apart stuff that doesn't need to be taken apart, like the handrail there. Because I was just guessing my way through this. I had never dug this deep into it. So there I am playing with the carburetor housing again, trying to figure out how in the world that thing comes out. And finally I realized that right there, you can see me inserting that 1/4-inch drive. It's a 5/16, but that socket is so tight in there. It's like to get to the nut, you need a skinnier socket. But I didn't have any smaller than this one for a 1/4-inch. But there's 2 nuts in there, and that's what holds on the plastic housing and the carburetor to the engine. So you don't need to do any of that extra crap that I did with the hand railing or the other screws on the other side you saw me take out. Which is kind of half the fun with all these DIY projects, is learning more about what you're actually working on. I probably could have sped up the film here, but I wanted it to be in real time for the parts that are important for people. And there I am pointing out the studs that the nuts screw onto. And I don't know if you can really tell on the video, but I am really trying to force that socket all the way down over the little stud and over the nut. It, like I said, is very tight. I don't know if Sthil has a special tool for that, and it's tough to actually feel your way through this because I don't know if I'm turning the nut or I'm just turning the socket inside the plastic housing. And in that case, just now, I was just turning the socket. I didn't get it deep enough down there to the nut. And now I'm trying to use a screwdriver to push it in. And I thought maybe if I use the screwdriver to turn that a little bit, I'll be able to feel if I'm actually on the nut versus just turning the socket in that tight gap. I think I might actually have it this time, so that's exciting. Almost there. And now I really wish I wouldn't undid that handrail, because every time I grab onto it to push against the back, I can't get any leverage. So finally that comes out. You can kind of see in there where the socket is stuck in that plastic housing. But luckily it's plastic, so it does have a little bit of give. So you're able to cram that 5/16 down in there. And now this more or less just pulls out. The only thing holding it up is the throttle linkage there. Just grabbed a screwdriver to pop that out of place. And then the fuel lines. You got a fuel line up top and bottom. You just kind of wiggle that out. Plastic housing comes off, and then the carburetor itself comes out. Just hung up on the fuel lines, so I popped those off. And you can kind of see that carburetor is just caked in sawdust and other goo, so I'm sure it's been sucking in a bunch of crap. That top one didn't leak at all. I just propped it up. Now the bottom one, I should have thought about this, but that really made a mess because I didn't empty the gas. You can see it pouring out. So I'm kind of pinching it off while I reach over to my wall of tools where I happen to have a small gas line clamp. Nope, I lied. I couldn't reach the clamp. That's right. So I put the gas line back on, went and found my clamp, and then took it off, and now you can see me putting the clamp on the fuel line there. Clamp that off so it stops spilling gas everywhere. There we are. Little tiny square looking carburetor comes right off. I'm used to working on like riding lawnmowers and such, and this carburetor was real funny looking. At least I thought it was. I'll move this out of the way. Again, can't use the grab handle because I undid it for no reason at all. So grab my carb cleaner and just start on the outside. I like to do that because I don't want contaminants from the outside working their way on the inside when I'm taking it apart. So I figure if the outside's clean, that's a good start. Now keep in mind, I don't know what any of these pieces are called. And I'm just kind of taking a look at it. I decided to start with that since it's just one screw. Pop that out, and there's great camera work. But off screen, there's a screen over that piece in my right hand. You can see me just make sure all the ports are clear on there. And you can see a little bit of dirt on that piece where the fuel line comes in. And a pressurized can does a good job of cleaning that out when you squirt it right in there. Just taking inventory of what I got there. So now I'm going to take off the other side. And this the side where the needle's at, I guess, is what you'd call it. I'm just taking my time to make sure I don't strip out any of these little tiny machine screws. Not the best camera work. But I'm learning how to run a camera while I do this, learning what the heck I'm doing. There we are, I centered it. And that's just a rubber grommet on that top plate of my right hand. There's a little goo on there, so we're going to clean that off. This rubber's worked on here pretty hard, so I'm just taking my time because I want to reuse this piece. I don't want to rip it. There we are. That comes off nicely. And you can see some debris in there, right about there, where I just pointed was the main, I'm going to call it needle, I guess. And you could take out that little screw there, but honestly, I saw the size of the parts, and I thought, no way. I'm going to lose these things. I don't have the dexterity for this. We'll clean it like this and try to run it, and go from there. Again, just cleaning out any ports or holes that I can see. Making sure that pressure is working through everything. A little bit of goo on the outside throttle linkage there, so just hit that real quick. Shoot out those gas lines one more time now that I have the top and bottom removed. And I'm just kind of taking my time staring at it. Making sure I didn't miss any little pieces of debris. Just double, triple checking my work here. Nothing fell out, which is good. I'm sure you could take that off. Just a little Phillips screwdriver. Alright, time to reassemble now that everything's all cleaned. So just put it all back together the way it came apart. Just make sure everything's lined up. I didn't want this leaking, obviously. Whoop, hit the camera there. I'll just go back and tighten up those screws that I started with. Now we'll get that bottom plate back on with the screen there. The screen looked clean. Is that it? I set it up right the first time? Guess I did. Nope. Put it on backwards. There we are. Luckily, there's a couple like nubs inside there. I don't know how else to explain it. It only fits on one way. So we'll get that back and tightened on. And we pretty much got all the internal parts cleaned on that and the exterior, so that just sits there. Brought the actual saw outside and sprayed that down. Try to get off a bunch of the gum and goo in there. And you can kind of see in the housing there how much cleaner it is now than when we took it apart. So the carburetor just slides right over those two studs. And keep in mind that red thing to the right of my hand is just my fuel line clamp. So now I'll hook the fuel lines up again. There's no brackets or anything that holds those on. They just push on. Tension fit, I guess you'd say. Loosen up my clamp, spill a little bit more gas, and get that on as quick as I can, since it likes throwing that gas everywhere. Now we grab that plastic housing, which is also your throttle linkage. Terrible camera work here. All you see is my forearm. And that plastic piece goes on one way, just slides in over those two studs that are sticking out. All in all, I think the most challenging part about this was, one, not knowing what the heck I'm doing, and two, getting the socket into those small little holes for those studs. Trying to start that nut, kind of a pain, because the socket's a little bit too thick. Or I should say maybe the holes in design of that are too small. But if you were ever going to cut and run on a video, now's the time. Because from here on out, it's just reassembly. And then our test run at the end. And my question is, will it run? For that, you'll have to stay tuned. Nah, you don't. You can still cut out right now if you want. It does run. So, we cleaned it and it worked. So life is good. Trying to figure out how that throttle linkage goes back in. Finally got that figured out. It just snaps in. It's pretty easy, but I think I had it upside down the first time. Didn't pay enough attention when I took it out. So here I am hooking up the rubber mounts to that plastic piece again. I wanted to give it as much stability as I could before I try to start those nuts, because I knew I was going to be pushing on that plastic piece a lot, because like I said a million times, the socket doesn't fit in those dinky holes. What I found is that side has to go in first and then do the other side. There's a final attachment, and then got to get those nuts on, because that holds both those attachments down to the carburetor. And then your air cleaner will just slide onto that. Air filter, I should say. And again, you can see me really giving it force. Didn't know if I was just turning the socket in the plastic or if I was on the nut. Luckily, it worked out. Now that socket is stuck in there, try to grab a screwdriver. It was tough to try to pull it out, because obviously when you twist it to make it easier to pull, it could be loosening the nut or over tightening the nut. So that took some playing with to figure that out. Maybe I just have cheap sockets, Stanley sockets, or too thick. I don't know. I still blame steel. Prying on that thing, just trying everything. Probably should have grabbed a needle nose pliers now that I watch this and do this voiceover. It's funny how that works when you're cutting a YouTube video. You can watch it and critique yourself, and then when you post it, one of you geniuses out there will critique me, and in the comments write something like that, like, why didn't you use a needle nose? And then you sit here and think, I knew that too. I caught it too when I reviewed it. Oh well. So now I'm trying to get that other nut in there. And tough to kind of start. I grab a magnet. And of course, a magnet's not powerful enough to hold it and turn it at the same time, but at least it got me lined up to the stud in there. And then I just straighten it out with the screwdriver. And now the nut's right on the edge of the stud, so we can switch back to our sockets and get that puppy in there. And it popped out there, looked kind of vicious, but I was trying to hold it at an angle, if you will, to try to turn and pull the socket back out, because, like I said, it was stuck in there. So that's a win. We got that out. Now I'm just grabbing my little head flashlight, looking in at those nuts, making sure they look like they're seated. I give you a thumbs up, which tells me they are, and life is good. Now we'll reassemble. Put all this stuff back together. And a bunch of stuff I didn't need to take apart in the first place. But again, I learned some things. Before I button it up, I just wanted to play with that throttle, make sure choke and everything works right, and I didn't put something together wrong, and as luck would have it, I didn't. So now we start putting this back together. Air filter just twists on. Boop. Perfect. Just trying to remember where all these screws go. That again, I didn't need to take out. And they were a T27 on the side panel there. Not that you need to know that for a carburetor thing, but maybe you just want to know for the future, I guess. I don't know. But all the screws on this, whether they're the machine screws on the side or the coarse thread, they were all T27. Ratcheting screwdriver. I really like that thing. It's got a good feel. So there's one of the coarse thread ones, and that you can tell is when you go plastic to plastic. And then the second one I showed you there was a fine thread, and you can tell when you're going plastic into metal. You use the machine or the fine threaded one. Again, do not take that handle off when you work on your carburetor, because you don't need to, and it was a waste of time. But hey, I did learn how the handle was mounted on there, so that's good, I guess. For some odd reason, that machine screw right there on the top gave me some headaches. I wanted to, how do I put this? It didn't want to go down straight up and down. So I'm kind of playing with it a little bit there. Last thing I want to do is strip out one of these things. See, I get that screwed in on the bottom there. There's 2 there and then 2 on the other side. So there we are. That pretty much brings us to the end. If you stuck around this long, I realized some of this was painful and some of it was ridiculous. But hey, I got it done. Chainsaw runs again. Life is good. And next little project I got, I'll shoot some video, get that onto the intrawebs for you, and maybe you'll learn something. I know I did. Thanks.